So welcome to the PA Review. This is episode 6, Faces. And today I have with me Master Sergeant retired Jeremy Locke, which a lot of you are familiar with and know, but for those that don't, Jeremy, can you just give us a brief explanation of who you are and what it is you're doing here today?
I don't know what I'm doing here yet today, but my name is Jeremy Locke, retired Air Force Master Sergeant, 7-time military photographer of the year is kind of my claim to fame. But absolutely just love seeing the world, this beautiful world that we live in, through my lens and capturing the people that live within it. So just excited to be that guy that gets to witness life.
All right. And he's a little bit modest, so he's not going to tell you all his extra stuff that he's done. But he's got some really great projects he's working on right now, and he's got some great imagery that we're going to go over today, specifically talking about faces. And that brings us to our next guest on the panel, which is Dr. Mark Frank, and he is a professor at State University of New York up in Buffalo. And Professor Frank, can you go ahead and give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, I am chair of the communication department. My doctorate's in social psychology, and I've been studying nonverbal communication, including things like faces, facial expressions, and deception for probably almost 30 years now, and worked a lot with the military, the intelligence community, law enforcement community, and some of those applied settings as well. And so an opportunity to delve into some of this real world stuff, like what Jeremy talks about, what he's seeing through his lenses. I very much look forward to this opportunity.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here, and we're looking forward to just having this conversation today to discuss that kind of stuff. This is really more of like I like to call it a psychological experiment, something where we can kind of pick apart the brain of Jeremy Locke and figure out what it is that makes him tick a little bit when he takes some of these amazing photos that he's captured. So one of the things I want to jump straight into for both of you actually is the first question I wanted to ask is, what is the importance and what is your perspective on the importance of capturing people's faces? Jeremy, why don't we start with you, and as the artist and the one capturing faces here, what do you have to say about that?
Faces show it all. Tell us everything, I believe, about a person. You know, whether it be, you know, if they're happy, they're sad, they're angry. A face is what draws us in. And I was always taught that there's a couple things in an image that draws a viewer in to pay more attention to it. White space in a photograph will draw you in. Words on a photograph will draw you in. And eyes will draw you in. We have this connection with eyes that will draw us in. And ultimately, that's what we want, is to be drawn in by the eyes or the action of the photograph.
Awesome. And Dr. Frank, what is your perspective on that concept? And from a psychological perspective, how do faces draw us in? I mean, from an artist's point of view, like, I'm drawn to faces, I'm drawn to the eyes themselves. But why is it that we're drawn to that?
Well, an artist like Jeremy will certainly he's recognized why that's important, right? It draws you in, and it draws in because this is how we are biologically wired, okay? We recognize people by their faces, right? So your driver's license has a picture of your face. It doesn't have a picture of your foot, right? This is how and recognizing who is who turns out to be an extraordinarily important thing evolutionarily. The second thing is, faces do express what we call our primary basic emotions: anger, fear, contempt, so on and so forth. And this is something that is hardwired into us. Now, we learn to manage and control these expressions as we grow up, based on culture, based on other kinds of norms. But often, despite our efforts to manage and control these, often the true essence, the true feelings that we have leak out despite our efforts to control it. So one of the things about faces, you know, Confucius had, you know, the eyes are the The countenance is the reflection of the soul. It was Cicero, actually, a Roman, right? The face is the reflection of the soul, not only in terms of who you are, but what you're feeling. And these are two of the most important kinds of things that we as human beings do as we navigate our worlds.
So Jeff, just to piggyback on that, I know we talked a little bit about it, but the question is, again, we connect with faces, exactly what the doctor was saying, over, say, a piece of hardware. So although it is important to have that plane, tank, ship in the image, but ultimately at the end of the day, my job as a photojournalist is to capture the people who are working with those things. It's their face. How do they feel about working on this piece of equipment or working with? So, you know, the planes and trains and automobiles and all that stuff will always be in the background, right? But those faces are what's going to capture me and lead me in. I've seen an F-15, I've seen an F-15. I haven't seen a person's face all the time. And the same thing with, like, I truly believe that hands and feet can tell a story. They can be very telling of that person, but there's no emotion there. I think it's the details within those that tell that story that make them so interesting.
Right. And the face is the primary vehicle for expressing these emotions. We can do some of that with our voices as well, but it's the face. And it's not just us, by the way. Our closest animal relatives, the chimpanzees and bonobos, also primarily express their emotions through their faces. Other social animals do. To be a social animal, you have to communicate. Now, we can communicate with words. Okay, what time's dinner? Who's picking up grandma? But then, right, but we've evolved this. But we are social animals, and prior to the advent of language, we had to communicate non-verbally. Other social animals do it. Dogs do it with their bodies and their tails. Whales do it with their songs. Birds do it with their songs. But we, chimpanzees, bonobos, it's our faces. So therefore, they have that kind of import.
So what would you say to somebody that makes the argument that, like, people really love seeing aircraft? They love seeing them take off. They love seeing, for me here at AFSOC and down at the Special Operations Wing, people love seeing the CV-22 fly. It just looks cool. People love seeing the gunship shoot its guns, stuff like that. And in a lot of cases, there is not faces or there's not people directly in those photos, although they're obviously on the aircraft. So when you got those people that are like goo goo gaga over aircraft or hardware, so to speak, what would your explanation be to them on how you could enhance an image by including a person in that? Or to the photographer that wants to make that argument, well, people, all they want to do is they want to see the hardware. They don't care about the people's face.
Well, when you look at the hardware, what do you say? Oh, cool. That's cool, right? And I truly believe hardware, yes, if you want to get a little technical, like all F-15s aren't the same. This one might have a scratch, that this one doesn't. So there's little details and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's a piece of hardware. And hardware, in my eyes, is it's the only thing that makes them different in every shot is the background. And if you look at that, an F-15 is still an F-15. Jane is still not Jane if she's called a different Jane. She's different, right? So again, it's just that thing where it's cool, but it doesn't make me want to get up and change the world. Whereas if I see, a lady screaming in the street, or a soft, gentle tucking in of an emotion of a child, I feel something and I want to do something. Ultimately, that's what our goal is as photojournalists, is I want to make a difference. I want that image to make you feel something. If I haven't made you feel something, then I don't feel it's a lot of feel, right? But I don't feel it's worked.
And evolution has wired us to be able to do that. That's one of the fascinating things about it, that the facial expression of anger or fear or happiness or sadness is the same in every culture. It's part of our wiring as human beings. So, Jeremy, when you go to Uganda, when you go other parts of the world, you can tell when somebody's happy, you can tell when someone's angry, even though you may not have ever set foot in that culture before.
Absolutely.
There's certain human universals that enable us to connect. And that's one of the things I really like about this. You see a sad person in Tanzania or in Burma, or wherever it is, you've been sad yourself. So you can have that sort of, at least that level of relationship. And the expression, for the most part, will be, the similar. It's recognizable. So it enables you to build those connections to people who are from very different cultures.
Jeff, just a quick little story on that.
Yeah.
So when I was down covering the Haiti earthquake, we were there just a couple days or a day after it happened. We were down there and I'm shooting the devastation and how people are affected. I think a day or two went by and my command called up and they go, we need to see the aircraft delivering the supplies. That's what we need to see. Believe me, I understand it. I get it. But and what I told them is the people are what matter right now, right? The people are the ones that are being affected. That's why all this aircraft and stuff are coming down there. They're going to keep coming. They're going to keep coming. But, a week from now, the people aren't going to be as affected as much as they are now. So for me, as a photojournalist, I want to show you why this mighty air power, this mighty military is coming down to help. I can always show that at a later time.
Right, it's like the fact and the feeling. You have to have both. And you're making sure to capture the second part.
So would you argue that, like, if someone wants a really, really solid photojournalist piece, a series of several photos, maybe like 7 photos to go along with a long caption or a story, it would be very, very smart of them to include close-ups of individuals' faces, even though they may be capturing something like a hurricane or the decimation of an area due to a natural disaster or something like that.
I do, absolutely. Again, how are these people feeling? How are they dealing? Not only facial, recognition and how they, the triggers on there, but the body language tells a whole nother story that, if used in conjunction with the facial features, just sells the story more. But absolutely, you need the moment, right? You need the moment, and then you need to identify the person that's going through this. So whether it's close-up portrait or something like that. And then you need the overall scene. Where is this taking place? Is really, now if you can get moments in every single one, that's just money.
So Dr. Frank, let's kind of turn a little bit into, like, from a marketing perspective, why should we care about the faces, right? So obviously they're important. Obviously they need to be in our products and they need to be coupled with other things in order to tell a whole story. But why should we care about these people's emotions if our goal is to sell aircraft?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things they do is this idea of emotional contagion, right? So you see that in somebody else, it can trigger often at a subconscious level a similar feeling in yourself. Particularly, for example, if you look at smiles, right? There's a nuance to the differences. There's different types of smiles that we show, and only one type of smile seems to be associated with the emotion of happiness. And that involves the one that's got the crow's feet, right? And, Jeremy probably knew this. He probably didn't know the exact detail of the name of the muscle, but he knew when he saw a genuine smile versus a smile that's just posed, right? At a gut level, he knew that. But that's the science of it, is this. And it turns out if somebody is smiling like this with the muscles around the eyes plus the lips, as compared to just the lips and not the eyes, people do feel different looking at that photograph. It does trigger a little bit of an emotion in them. So if you're thinking from a marketing point of view, showing the happiness of that particular individual does translate into this subtle little emotional trigger within other people to sort of feel a similar type of an emotion. So that's just one way in which this can be used.
So what I heard out of that whole conversation, that crow's feet are good. It means you're happy.
Yep, that's it. Yeah. Orbicularis oculi is the name of the muscle, if you're keeping track at home.
So what are some of the things that we might be able to, as photojournalists or broadcast journalists, videographers, creating productions and content, what are some things that we could focus on, like specifically, if we're looking at someone's face, what are some things we can focus on to produce better images or more coherent images?
I, you know, I kind of talked to you, Jeff, about this, but it's when I go into a certain scenario, just right off the bat, say I go into an exercise, and I'm not saying this is right, and the doctor can get on me about this, but I have to start somewhere. I know this massive exercise that I have to cover. Again, tanks, planes, and all that stuff, they'll be in the background. I have to find my characters, right, that I'm gonna gravitate to. So, and it doesn't happen a lot. Normally my characters are there. But honestly, I go in right off the bat. If I can't find a starting place, I look for the most beautiful people, and I look for I don't want to say most ugly, but I look for an ugly kind of person. It sounds so bad, but it's not. But I feel and the doctor can tell me, like, we as humans, we're interested in that. I don't want to. It's like looking at photographs. If I see medium shots all along, I get tired of it after 2 seconds, and I want some breadth of in your face wides. So that's my starting place, because I feel human beings want to look at pretty people and ugly people, and then normally my characters will evolve.
Mm-hmm. Well, things that are unusual attract our attention. This is how another way that we are wired as human beings. It's the novel. Something that's different is the thing that stands out. So just like if you live in an apartment near a busy street, after a while, you don't hear the buses go by. But your friend comes to visit and says, how can you sleep? And, with all the buses, well, you get used to it, right? But if the buses stop running, then you're like, oh, wait, that's kind of weird, right? So we are programmed for novelty in that regard. And most of us, let's face it, are average, right? So when you get somebody extreme at one end or extreme the other way, it automatically draws our attention because of the novelty of it, right? And so that also makes us curious because it's different that way as well. So again, when you're looking, Jeremy talks about his instincts going through this, there is once again science that supports why that would be the case. And that's, I think, always fascinating to me as the scientist, because, I enjoy art. I enjoy good photography. I enjoy Jeremy's work. My wife's photographer. I really like good photos. But I always tell my students, because I'm training them to be scientists, art is just science we haven't figured out yet, right? But the artists are often ahead of us because they've known it at a gut level. And then us scientists down the line end up sort of confirming a lot of what they knew in their gut, and some of the psychological or biological principles behind it.
But to get back to your question, Jeff, what can videographers, photographers go in and learning? Honestly, it's getting personal, having a genuine interest in the story that you're covering, the people that you're covering, being inquisitive. The more you're inquisitive, the more that they're willing to open up. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's studying body language, thinking ahead, knowing that if A is going to happen, B is possibly going to be happening, and you're ready to capture that, whether it's a guy getting his finger crushed or a big hug or something. But it's body language and looking for the moments and just being in tune with that.
Yeah. And from our point of view, what we've done with the military in many ways is looking at behavioral predictors of things. So for example, in counterterrorism, force protection, things like this. How do you know if somebody has bad intentions? It was put to me once in an ONR meeting, Office of Naval Research. And there was a Marine lieutenant colonel there. And he came up to me and he said, I want to know 2 things. Number 1, do they have the capability to kill me? Number 2, do they have the motivation to kill me? And I want to know them in that order, right? So the number 2 thing is where somebody like a social psychologist can come in and say, here's some of the things to look for in terms of what they're doing with their bodies, what they're doing with their faces. Is that potentially predictive? Now, it's not always going to be perfect. Okay, we're not just simple stimulus response vehicles, much more nuanced than that. But if you can sort of change the probabilities, so to say this person's 10% likely to hurt me, or this person's 60% likely to hurt me, that's important things to know, important knowledge to know, to be forearmed and be prepared to do whatever you need to do to defend, defer, whatever the 5 Ds of force protection.
It's interesting you mentioned that and talking about the force protection position on this, because obviously with force protection, they're not looking at just the face, they're looking at the entire body. And as you know, you and I had talked previously about how the body carries the face, and body language, it makes up a certain amount of communication that we have back and forth with other individuals. But what would you say, I don't know if you can put a percentage on it, or as far as like what people should be focused on, but as far as body language and showing an entire body versus just showing someone's faces, what are the benefits there, the pros and the cons of showing just a head versus an entire body?
Right. Again, depending on the situation that you're dealing with, it's important because the body is not quite a signaling system. In one way it is, we've learned to do true body language, things like a thumbs up, an okay sign. But keep in mind, these things are culturally specific. So if I do the V for victory and my palm is facing out, this means peace. Or if I turn my palm in towards me, it means peace in the United States. It turns out if you live in the UK or in Australia or in other parts of the British Commonwealth, the V for victory with the palm turned in means screw you. So this is an insult. The okay sign is an obscene gesture in most parts of the world, by the way, right? So these things are culturally specific. They mean specific words, but that's an exception. Normally what the body does is it tends to enhance the action tendency of the emotion. So for example, anger is an attack emotion. So when people are angry, their bodies tend to lean forward, right? Because it's about approach, all right? The chest comes out, the chin comes out, things along those lines. Fear is an avoidant emotion. So when people are afraid, they tend to sit back, they tend to lean back, they tend to, you know, because escape is the primary feeling that is coursing through their body. Now, again, often reflected in the face, but the body's reflecting the tendency that comes with that emotion, right? So therefore, it enhances that signal. Now, again, if you're in a situation where people are walking or you're doing, you know, you're an SP outside of a base or something along those lines and people are moving towards you, that can be a really important source of information. Back in the old days, back in the early 80s, I used to be a bouncer and I thought I could predict. And in the nights I worked, we had many fewer fights than when other guys worked. And a lot of it you could just tell by how guys were standing, looking at each other and all the other kind of stuff, who was, you know, had it out for somebody. And if you could intervene before the fight and sort it out, then, you know, it always worked out better that way. So.
It's interesting that you were a bouncer previously. Was that like a study that you did as part of your thing, or was that just because you needed some money?
What got me interested in the field in the first place. I thought I got really good at reading people, like who was underage. We used to have the parking lot behind the bar. When people would come walking around the corner and I would make eye contact, they would always contact with them. There was always some disfluency in the step for the underagers or people who were having some kind of an issue. If they had a weapon, they might do something like touch it. At that point, there was always, at least I thought so. Now, again, it was not a controlled experiment, but it got me interested. What are those factors? What am I reading here? And I thought I was pretty good at it. And then as I went on to graduate school, that's where I started to study it more formally. But it was informally that night. But I did know the nights I worked, we had a lot fewer fights than when other people were.
Jeff, with in regards to showing the full face of the body language, I think, like, I shoot it both ways, right? I definitely get my tight portrait because everybody loves that in your face kind of impact. But I think what it is the body language has to complement what's going on in the face, adds to the storytelling image. Again, at the end of the day, it has to be a storytelling image. And if that body language adds to the story and the surrounding areas, then you're gonna see a wider portrait. I haven't thought about that until now. So, I mean, as we go through, you know, we can see, you know, did I just go in tight or did it really, you know, mean something to have that extra stuff in? I don't, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited to go through some of those photos with y'all here. So if you got anything else on that, we'll go ahead and start sifting through some of JT's imagery and really picking it apart. See if we can figure out where you hit the mark or missed the mark, right? All right.
You know, one of the questions you had brought up too while you're going through is what's the potential results from seeing the emotions. Ultimately, at the end of the day, my job as a photographer is, you know, say newspaper times or website times. I want you to stop, right? I want you to stop. My job is to make you stop and read the caption. And hopefully you're reading the caption and seeing the image gets you very interested that you want to turn the page and read the story and see more photos. So ultimately that's my goal. So just going out there and photographing, you know, a blah thing and you're turning it in as a blah thing. My job in the military, I want you to read more about that tanker. I want you to read more about that tank, you know? So my job is to make you want to turn the page.
Well, I think that's what we all just want to do, is we want to get people to turn the page, right? I mean, you're talking about newspapers. Of course, we don't really use those as much anymore. The digital page, you want them to swipe.
You see lots, yeah, like I said, you see lots of nuance too. When you study these in detail. My nonverbal communication class, I'll show a photo and I'll remove the caption and say, what do you know about these two people? And, you know, and when you start to think of it that way, as compared, normally just read the caption, but there's something else in that photo. A good photo will capture us in other ways. And then you realize there's all sorts of subtle signs that tell you these people have a relationship. You can tell by the way he's touching this other person. You can tell by how they're looking at you. You're telling how, you know, how the other person is reacting to the, there's this whole sort of story in there that often the captions just simply repeat. But again, a good photograph has just so many of those little nuances. And my students are always surprised how much info they get when you just start to break down all the detail that comes out of it. So.
Sure, yeah, and everybody's perspective is different on something. So it's interesting to see how people see it differently than ourselves. You know, am I the only person that sees this image this way, or does the majority see it this way? I know there's an exercise where we do something similar where people will bring up photos that they've taken without the caption. Everybody kind of gives their opinion as to what's going on, and then we talk about what actually was happening. And then you can see if the photographer had, and I don't know how your feelings on this JT, but did the photographer manipulate the situation with the way they took the photograph to change, not change reality, but change the perception, or give their perception to the viewer in such a way that it made them think a specific way about a situation. So, I mean, obviously you go into an earthquake and there's one house that crashed down and everything else is completely fine. And that's all you take pictures of, and you just flood the internet with these photos of this house that crashed in. Right, definitely. Creating a false narrative. But that's not lying necessarily, it's just not telling the whole story.
That's the problem with society right now.
Right. Kind of just giving a single person's perspective instead of kind of understanding that everybody really needs to see everything that's going on.
Right.
So
the one person crying, you take the shot, but there's 99 people happy, right? You could create, but yet to see 99 happy and one sad, to see the whole thing, that becomes interesting then. So why is that one person then sad? So yeah, there are different ways to manipulate that.
Am I going to take that close-up person crying? Absolutely. But my caption, if that's the only photo that I have, my caption is going to reflect. I'm not going to try to mislead you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's obviously very important as we continue to like show exactly what's going on when we document things. I'm going to go ahead and share this my finder here, and so that we can kind of go through some of these photos. And I'm just going to sift through the ones that I've got here. These are all your photos, correct, JT?
Yes.
The ones these are the ones that I downloaded that you had uploaded for me.
Yeah, that's enough.
So these are all your photos, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of sift through these real quick, so everybody kind of gets an idea as to what we're going to be going over, and then we'll come back and we'll kind of pinpoint a couple to talk about. But for those of you that are watching, I encourage you, if you see one in here that stands out and you want to ask questions about it, you want to know more about it, if you want to just ask a question in general, go ahead and drop it right into the comments on this feed, and we'll bring that up and we'll try to talk about everything that we can. So these are some interesting ones you got here from this was
a project I did at Burning Man for your.
That's right, Burning Man. And several of these photos, if I remember correctly, are from your series 21, which actually encompassed the 21. Not that they encompass, but they were your 21 favorite photos of your 21 years of
Yeah,
service, correct?
there might be like one or two in there. I tried to just pick stuff that hasn't been out in a while, or maybe is on my blog, but just kind of, and honestly, because I knew the doctor was gonna go through them, I kind of picked things that didn't, like that one. Stop there for a second. Like that's the girl screaming that you're on. That's an in your face kind of thing. And I'm kind of curious on others to where, what's going on, you know? So anyways, go ahead, you can go.
A lot of variety in the different emotions that come into play here throughout all of these. And I noticed there's some that are portraits, and there's some that are obviously taken on different scenes, some that are portraits on scene. And so I'd be curious to talk about the difference between a candid photo, which is considered documentation, versus ones where you maybe like set up a scenario and you set up the lighting for a moment, and capture someone's face that way.
Yeah, and in all these, as we're going through, notice the lighting on all of them too. Lighting to me creates the mood. Whether you come in and artificially set it up or you capture it, I think lighting has a lot to do with what's going on these people's faces as well. So,
okay. So the first one you wanted to talk about here, JT, was this one right here. And if you want to go ahead and give some background on this photo, and then Dr. Frank can kind of give some perspective on the emotion coming out of him.
So I want to throw out something for everyone in the military right now is, look, I was wrong back in the day when I was in. I was that guy who was like, oh, I'm a big bad combat camera photographer. We don't use lights. We can't use lighting. Look, there's a time and a place for everything. There really is. And since being retired, I've learned that. And I've learned that I have to come up with another set of tools. And this is what actually kind of got the hair raising on my arms again and getting excited, was being able to create portraits. Now, most of these, when I create these portraits, I really don't say anything to them. I'm not like, look at the camera, smile. I might hold my hand up over here and say, okay, turn this way, turn this way. It's really letting them capture the essence of who they are. So, and you'll see that throughout. So quick little background. This is Benny Atkins. He's a Medal of Honor recipient. I've been doing a portrait project on Medal of Honor recipients. He recently just passed away from COVID. So I actually just printed up this print. I'm going to send it to his family. It's one of my favorites, and the reason why is his facial expression. But I don't know why. I just, you know, the lighting's nice, blah blah blah, but it's this facial expression in this body language. So I'm very interested to hear about this.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things about it that's fascinating, you know, we were just talking about how the body can amplify or de-amplify some of the emotion that comes with it. And anger is an approach emotion, and dominance is, and pride, you know, pride is about up and out, you know, submission is down and in. And, you know, the contrast of age that you see in his face, but yet his shoulders are up and his body's up, and he's got a forward lean, and his head is forward and his chin is out. And so there is this sort of prideful sort of dominance coming out of this. And yet, again, you can see, you know, all the signs of age. It's one of the other things we're very good at, is estimating people's ages from their faces, right? And so it's a sort of the juxtaposition of those two things is one of the things that jumps out at me. But that's where the signal's coming from out of this, Jeremy. You know, you see it's the forward lean, the chest is up, the shoulders are back, and he's staring sort of straight ahead at that. And the eyebrows are sort of down a little bit. And we see that when people, concentrate a little bit, but you're seeing it almost a little bit more of a hard stare because his eyes are open a little wide too. And when we think of the emotion of anger or dominance, it's often a hard stare with a little bit of tension in the eyebrows and the eyes open wide. So those combinations in here is what's sort of creating some of that sort of, prideful dominance, despite the man's age, and it just makes for a fascinating photo.
Any thoughts on that, JT?
No, it's so neat to hear, I know, I hear the prideful but there's also like a frailness to him. I feel, I don't know. But it's neat hearing all these little triggers that turns it into why I like it.
Well, that's where the juxtaposition comes in because, again, all the signs of aging, that you're talking about and the vulnerability that comes with that. Yet despite that, it's almost like I'm going to be doing this, probably it hurts my body to do this or whatever, but I'm going to do, at least that's part of the impression that comes along. But that's where the little social signals are. The chest up, shoulders back, chin forward, that sort of harder stare with a little bit of the eyebrows, despite what's clearly an older man.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's very captivating.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd love to hear what anybody else may have, any other perspectives that people may have on this, whether they love it, hate it, or they think he looks shocked or abnormal, or if they just feel like they're so enwrapped in this moment that they feel like they're actually there. And I think there's a lot to be taken from a photo where you can just look and feel the person's emotion, and almost, even though they haven't told you their story, you can either feel bad for them or feel proud of them or understand what they're going through to a certain extent. So let's go ahead and go on to the next photo here.
So this was a real kind of pivotal moment in my photojournalism career. So I just was starting to play around with like studio lighting, in a controlled environment. I was in Ghana, Africa, working, and I was doing a story on this scoliosis hospital. Real quick background, like I was strictly photojournalism, didn't have any lights or anything like that. And I worked with these kids for about a week and a half and just fell in love with the beauty of them. And I said, oh my God, I got this new bag of tricks. So I went out and rented local lighting and bought a backdrop and set it up in the hospital as one of the last days I was there. My intentions on this whole project, and you can go to my blog and kind of see the series. I'm getting ready to put it up on my website, but there's thought behind this portrait and the way I did these portraits. Again, these kids, what made me realize wasn't their deformity, it was the beauty that they showed me throughout the week. So in the series, you'll see the light hits the face with subtle light on the deformity. It's not about their deformity, it's about who they are. So that's kind of the background behind this portrait. It's the first time I took lights out or got lights out on the road on a project. Normally I'm just like, let these guys come in and I might sit here and say, pose this, or not pose, but turn your head this way, maybe over here now. But I really let it unfold. With him, and that's why I asked to have this one looked at. With him, there was some great photos, but I just felt it wasn't capturing who these children were. So I started to, I'd flash a bunch, but then I just stopped. And I kind of let him get uncomfortable to where he was fidgeting a little bit, and then took one or two shots to get this. So that's, sorry for the long story, but and again, did I manipulate by letting him? It's a controlled environment, right? So I'm manipulating everything, but it's the magic that happens from the moments that are in there, whether you're helping those moments come along or not. The lighting can be great, it can be bad, but if you don't have a moment, you don't have capture that person's essence, then it's just another portrait.
So that's an interesting perspective, JT, because I think it says a lot about a photographer, an individual that becomes almost a trusted agent of the people and the viewers and the audience themselves, in that you can take an individual or a situation and, as you said, manipulate it to a certain extent because it includes lights and you're asking them to do certain things. But I think that you are considered a trusted agent in the fact that people looking at this photo understand that you aren't making things up here. You're not creating something that isn't real. I mean, this individual obviously it does have this illness, and you know, you're trying to take the things that you know about photography in order to encompass that and really bring forth the beauty of this individual.
And as an editor, I'm there, right? And there are some really good other shots of him. But again, living there and being there, I just thought that this encompassed who he was, right? And it's hard for us because we as photographers, videographers, we get invested, we get involved. And that's why it's great to have other eyes, an editor, because I was there, I lived that. You heard that whole story of why I'm invested into this portrait and why I love it. But at the end of the day, if you're my editor and you look at it, go, yeah, it's okay. You know, hey, it hurts because I put all that stuff in there, but you got to have thick skin and realize that, okay, I get it. It didn't achieve the goal that I was trying to achieve.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting things going on here. And just what the science of the nonverbal would argue is a couple things. First, you can see very subtle lines in his forehead, which means his eyebrows are being raised slightly. When there's something novel or new or uncertain, that sometimes happens with people. In the emotion of surprise, you tend to see it a bit stronger. But what's uncertain about that too is that can also, if those eyebrows start to pull together, that can become fear. And the head cant, it's called, where the head sort of tilted sideways a bit, is often seen too as a little bit of an expression of vulnerability, right? So you have a bit sort of, it's novel as he's looking at something, not exactly sure, but yet even in just his head and his face, there's a vulnerability expressed there as well within it. And at least that's what some of those nonverbal signals. Now, again, because of the his body itself, it looks like the chest is out, but you know, that's part of the scoliosis as a function of some of that too. So the combination of those things are pretty fascinating.
Well, I think it's a fantastic photo, JT. I think you did a great job with that particular that project. So I want to move on to the Burning Man photos, and we'll just kind of look at these in a group because I feel like this is all kind of based on the moment, right? These are not necessarily, from what I understand of Burning Man, which isn't a whole lot, is it's a way for people to go and be free and express themselves in whatever way they want. But I mean, this guy goes to work on Monday and he's probably not looking like this.
Most of them are doctors, lawyers. It's just the way for this society, all self-sufficient, happens in Black Rock City desert, and it just is this big festival kind of thing. It's amazing. It's a freedom of self-expression. And so with these, and I have tons of these. I did 4 years doing this. And quick story why I did it. I was still in the military when I was there. 2009 was my first year, and I was doing photojournalism, going around, and I was at Center Camp. It's called Center Camp, and I just saw these people. I was photographing, and they were dancing this slow kind of dance, rubbing their sweaty bodies all over. I mean, it was unlike anything I've ever seen. Remember, I'm a military kind of guy. And I was just like, I set my camera down and I go, I don't belong here. This just isn't my cup of tea. Got on my bike, rode back to my camp. And as I'm riding back to my camp, I'm noticing there's beautiful people. I mean, it's just, I don't know what it is. you could be any size. You could be big, small, tiny, whatever, deformed. And there's something at Burning Man that just brings this beauty out in people, right? And so that's how as I wrote back, I go, that's what this place is about. It's about the people. You know, it's, again, it's not about the city. It's not about the photojournalists. It's the people. So tore down a shower curtain and set it up, brought people in. And all I said to them was express yourself in your own Burning Man fashion. That's it. Didn't tell them to do anything else. And what I got was just some magical stuff and some crazy, crazy stuff too.
Yeah, there's interesting stuff going on in all of these. I mean, if you look at this one with the guy in the blue, often in terms of dominance, submission about the amount of space you take up as per your body. And so this part reason why guys sit with their legs crossed at the ankle, some Latin American countries or women will cross at the knees, but he's also kind of staying within the contours of his body while he's doing that. So he's not just expanding out into the field of view and taking up more space than he's necessarily entitled to, which adds a sort of an interesting little element of that. And of course, you know, looking off the side and so on and so forth. But that's the one thing that stands out in that particular photo. Some of the other ones have some of their other characteristics.
Dr. Frank, so it's with him being hunched over like that and not wanting to take up all you know, really spread out and take up more space. Does that play into the individual's psyche per se, and what they feel like they deserve or they're entitled to themselves, or is it maybe a way of thinking that they're trying to close themselves in more from an exposed lifestyle?
When people do, they sort of, when they turn in, they do that. All the parts kind of come down in towards sort of the center of mass, but he's looking outside of the center of mass. So there's that little interesting sort of conflict coming in. He is sort of leaned over, and even though he's kind of crossed at the ankle, he's still not taking up that much space. The rest of his body stays in there, but he's still looking, you know, out and away from that, right? So
it could, maybe it has to do with these kind of being manufactured situations with, you know, obviously, you know, they're wearing crazy clothing and they're kind of freely expressing themselves, and then maybe this is really who they are, but then on Monday, or like, you know, JT was saying, a lot of them are doctors or lawyers. It's kind of puts them in a situation where they're here, where they're not really sure how to express themselves or what their expressions actually mean. Maybe they're trying to learn that themselves.
Although this is a bit of a controversial line of research at this point, but there was some evidence for a while that if you adjust your body posture towards the dominant, so you stand straight up and you put your chest out and hold your chin up and things like this, you know, put your hands out on your hips because that takes up space, right? The more kind of space you take a stance like that, people begin to feel more confident. So your feelings follow your body in that regard. The body also reflects the feelings, right? So it's this kind of feedback loop, but you can short circuit it a little bit. So if you want to feel more dominant, act more dominant, and then people will start to feel it a little bit. So
go to the first one. I think that's an example then, right, of what you're talking about.
Yeah, right? He's taking up a lot more space, right? He's sort of laying it right out there, and he's just, there I am. Take
so to
me
speak.
as I am.
Yeah, yes.
Like it or leave it. There's no kind of, he's not turned into himself. He's not, you know, this, you know, there you go. You know, there I am.
Yeah. All right. So getting off of Burning Man a little bit into a little bit more solemn of a situation. We got a couple photos here where there's a lot of darkness, and not to that one, but there's a lot of dark stuff and a lot of emotion that goes with some of these, specifically this one, and this one here. JT, can you kind of talk about real quick what these photos are in reference to?
Yeah, the first one is on the cab is a part of a story I just completed over in India, and it's on these cabs of Calcutta. which is the essence. So I've been following around and doing a documentary on these cabs, but I really didn't have anybody in the cab. So, and this is a family from Bangladesh that the father is in the green and his daughter is the girl. And, you know, they're coming here to get her checked up. So, and they're leaving the hospital area. So that's really the meat and potatoes behind that one.
Yeah, her expression is the most interesting, and I'm having a hard time sort of make out details. It almost looks like a little bit of a conflicted sort of an expression a little bit. There's almost like a little bit of a smile that's being suppressed a little bit. But it's
At first glance, it doesn't seem like there's much going on here. Like it just seems like
Mhm.
it's, you know, some people in the back of a cab. But for whatever reason, I'm getting a feeling of like there's some sort of emotional situation going on here. These people are not just going to and from lunch or dinner or whatever. They're going somewhere that is paramount to their life, really.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's right. A lot of uncertainty with her in terms of her her look and her expression. You know, the father, it looks very calm. There doesn't seem to be any particular, at least emotion being shown through either the body language or the face. But she is right up close on him. Now, some of it may be a function of the cab, but the fact is that, you know, we're tactile creatures, and particularly, you know, children. And when they're, you know, distressed, they lean in on the parents, the caregivers. So there's some of that going on in the photo here too.
You know, one of the things I do want to say to whoever's listening that, you know, this is the difference between a photographer, a guy who pushes the button, or an amazing photojournalist is the ability. This happened, this is literally a 5-minute thing. I met them and was able to talk my way and make them feel safe enough to jump in a cab and document them for a 10-minute ride. So having the notion and being able to talk to people and make them feel at ease is huge in our industry.
So when it comes to the imagery itself, JT, what potential results come from seeing the emotion behind these people in the photographs that you take? And what potential results come from being patient and waiting for that moment for that emotion to show itself?
I think you always have to be patient. And you always have to be vigilant, you know, because, you know, moments happen fast. But it's being able, again, 5 minutes, 10 minutes with these people, but putting them at ease, but also not, you know, again, I'm in India. I'm the big white guy with a camera. Everybody's staring at you, right? But to put them at ease and let them, you know, yes, they were looking at me for a little bit, and then it was just like you become that fly on the wall, and then you kind of disappear and let them, they get disinterested. Kids, it takes a little bit longer, but how does this progress? So if I have a picture story and I'm just showing you process shots, step 1, step 2, step 3, the story never really progresses. You get tired of turning that page kind of ordeal. If you have moments in each of these photos, I want to turn and see what's next in the story. And again, moments make you feel something.
Mhm.
So what are some other photos that we've got in here that you'd like to look at, JT or Mark?
I like the, what was it, the Ghana, or not Ghana?
Uganda, the kids.
Kenya, or whatever, Uganda, yeah, that was the one.
Uganda, kids peering through the fence.
Mhm.
Oh, yes.
Back to your left, the other side.
Is it back?
Right there.
Right there, oh, just right
Yep.
there.
Okay. So yeah, in this photo, I think that there's a lot to be said about all the texture and the saturation and all of the stuff that goes into it fundamentally. But again, yes, let's go with JT. Can you kind of explain the situation for us so that Mark can kind of analyze it a little bit more?
Yeah, again, my advice to people is, if you go out and shoot a football game, yes, the main action is on the field, and that's what you want to cover. You're there to cover. So this was Uganda Army. We were training the Uganda soldiers, and they were running like not an obstacle course, but they're a training exercise course. And again, it's being able to stop, take a breath, turn around and look around in this world. How are other people reacting to what's going on? And it was these school children that were inquisitive, whether it was at me, whether it was at the soldiers. I don't normally like people staring right at the camera. I think if he was smiling and cheesing it up for the camera, I would just move on. I'd take it, but I don't think you guys would be looking at it today. But there's just something that those eyes like engage me and bring me in, and a great photograph, in my opinion, makes you want to explore. So then I start looking around this and start seeing the eyes peering up behind to, the other children in the back. So I'm interested to know what these children are thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is fascinating because there's so many different states of affair going on amongst the kids themselves, and lots of other little clues as to who they are and just simply the nature of their relationships with each other. So as you go from left, you see the kid hiding behind the branch there. He's wide-eyed, so he's interested. Then you go to the next kid with the smile. Well, one thing you notice about that particular smile is, again, there's nothing around the eyes. So this is not a happiness smile. In many cultures, when people are uncertain, they smile. And I think this is what you might see in East Africa. You get a lot of uncertainty, at least some of the anthropological reports from the 1940s. Hard to see. Then you see another kid hiding farther behind. So you have that sort of a depth. And then you've got the kid who's coming out towards you, and he's looking right at you. And there's not really much expression as far as from an emotional point of view. But the absence of expression is often interesting and important. And the fact the other kids are kind of hiding behind him a little bit, we'll come back to him in a second. Then you go to his left there, and you see that might be a girl back there. Eyebrows are up and the eyes are wide, and she's looking, and that you're seeing some of this in the expression of fear. And so she is nervous in terms of what's going on. So you have a lot of uncertainty, nervousness, and yet then there's this one kid coming out into the forward, right? And so I would argue, I think what it looks like is that these, kids, they hang out together. He's probably one of the leaders of that group, right? Leadership in kids manifests itself as early as 5 years of age. They've done studies where they make kids drink Kool-Aid without sugar in it. And so it tastes really bad. And the kid's supposed to say, oh, this tastes delicious. And the kids who are best able to manage their emotions, that is, convince you that this tastes good when it really doesn't, are the same kids who are the leaders on the playground, the same kids that other kids follow around. Yeah. So you see him, he's managing his emotions. The others are showing uncertainty, fear, they don't know, but so that just fits right within that. So all these kids are kind of behind him a little bit, but he's able to manage it, and he's coming forward. He's not hiding as much behind, he's breaking cover a little bit to sort of engage the interloper, the others. And the rest of them are all kind of gathered a little bit behind him, waiting to see what might happen as a function of this. So again, all those little nonverbal signals coming out, right, from their faces, and in his case, some of his body stuff. And of course, nonverbal signals like in clothing, you said school kids, you can tell they got their little school ties and things on, and school, the white shirt and the blue tie or whatever it might be. So, but it's a tremendous photo.
So JT, how does that make you feel about the photo after hearing that?
It again, there was so much going on, right? Like he describes so much, and I think we see that. We don't know why. Like, I don't know the expressions right off the bat, like how he describes it. But I think that's what makes it a photograph I want to keep looking at, because there's so much stuff going on that you want to just pick out and explore. And you're the whole time, I'm not an expert in this, but I want to know what's going through their mind.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yep. He's coming out to engage JT. He's okay. Who is this interloper? And everybody else all a little nervous and hiding behind what's going to happen, what's going on. And our guy's taking the lead to check out what Jeremy's up to.
I will tell you one thing. And I recommend, if you haven't already done it, but a fun thing to do, and when you go to these kind of countries, again, I'm the big white guy with a camera, right? So everybody's kind of looking at you. And I'll be photographing sometimes, and just say this scenario, and I'll be photographing work and looking at what I'm photographing, but you can feel these kids, right? You just feel them. Next time you're out there, just turn around and go rah, right at them. They scatter, but laugh afterwards. They scatter and run and just laugh and have a good time. Great icebreaker.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a novelty, element. When you were in your village, you haven't seen. I knew a colleague from graduate school, and I think she was a Mormon and gone on a mission in China, and she was a blonde female. And she said, like, the village would come out to look at her because they just had not seen people like that, right? Not in a hostile way, but just in a curiosity way, because they just don't have an opportunity to see that much. And you can sort of tell. I'm often in environments where I am the only Caucasian guy, and I can, you can tell the difference between, oh, curiosity, why is he here, versus why is he here? Very different kind of a take.
And again, it's having that ability when you're out working to put people at ease. Your body language says a lot, so when you have to go out and cover, the flight line, you're not walking around going, oh, stomping like, oh, I got to cover this. I mean, it's being genuinely interested in what you're covering and the people who are involved.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of, obviously the work that we do on a daily basis, we often deal with individuals that are, for lack of better words, exhausted, right? And here we have a photo of, these kids, and this girl in the middle is just, she looks so exhausted. And that's something that I can pick out fairly simply. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Frank, but the other kids don't necessarily show it quite as much, but she's, staring off into the distance. She's kind of hunched forward a little bit. Her mouth is open. Her eyes are pointing down. So these are just from me watching the show lie to me. I've kind of picked up on some stuff myself, but that's kind of what I take away from this. But obviously, it's not our goal to show exhausted military members as we work on a day-to-day basis. So how is it important, or how does it affect the viewer
Let's don't say it's not your goal. I mean, you don't want to sit there and just show exhausted. I want to see exhausted military. It means you're human. We're not always machines all the time, right? So,
right.
But again, how does that person get to be exhausted? By doing a kick-ass job, being a maintainer on an aircraft, or out being a Marine kicking in doors.
Sure.
I'm not going to show a Marine exhausted because he's exhausted. So there's got to be some thinking. I want to see that exhausted Marine, but I also want to know why he's exhausted.
You need a little context to go with that particular story. Right. Yeah. That's a great point.
I mean, not just exhausted, but disappointed a little bit too, because where the eyes and the placement of the shoulders as well. So.
So that brings up, there's a couple photos in here where I think that there's military members that are, trying to remember whereabouts they are. JT, if you know a little bit better.
Which ones are? There
was is it this one? Nope. That's a military member, but not U.S. military. Well, there's of course this one, which is part of your 21, which I absolutely love. And this is part of exactly what you're talking about with the Marine, that he seems exhausted. But there's context that goes to this.
Right, absolutely. So again, when I go in and photograph these guys for a day or 2 days or whatever, it's a whole story. I'm submitting a whole story. Again, what does the caption say? The caption just doesn't say tired, broke Marine, right? It doesn't say that.
Right.
Or a soldier, he's Army. What it says is that this guy has been on his feet doing patrols in such and such degree weather. Finally, in a safe place, they get a 2 seconds downtime to regroup, regather, and before they go back out on, again, another Groundhog Day mission where they don't know if they turn that corner, they're going to get blown up or not.
Mm. Yeah, you see him sort of recline back into the contours of the wall there, which suggests, yeah, he's really tired to sort of letting it go in that regard.
So I'm curious if there's, we're going to come back to that one, but there's a couple other military photos in here where I feel like they didn't necessarily appear exhausted, but I feel like they probably were. And I apologize, I'm just trying to find these real quick. There's these ones.
That's from the same day out there at basic training. So
okay.
To me, I see what we call, Doctor, the suck factor. So I don't see tired or exhausted. I just see, man, this sucks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there isn't sort of much more what I think one can really say about that. I mean, you see a little bit with the eyebrows coming down, so a little bit of concentration. But yeah, sort of laying in the muck, and particularly see the person looking over from the right of the image at them, getting sort of stuck in there, or maybe being yelled at, or whatever it is from the person who's sitting there, the drill instructor.
Mm. There's one more photo that I really wanted to touch on. We just tapped on it for a second there, but I wanted to go back to it. And this was the one of the person that was being squished in the crowd.
Yes, that was probably one of the most scary days, as off the battlefield. This was the Haiti earthquake humanitarian food we were distributing, and kind of got overrun. I had to, and it's just from great, beautiful people. Nobody was trying to hurt anybody, but it was people from the back. The more people heard, the more people came and were pushing to try to get ahead. They broke the military line. I had to roll underneath the 2-ton truck, climb up on the 2-ton truck, and then I witnessed this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see a lot of interesting things here. So with the eyebrows down, and you also with the orbicularis oculi, and that combination, and we see in the upper face, is pain that we tend to see, and the upper lip gets pulled up a little bit. The man directly behind him, you see his eyebrows pulled up and together, wide-eyed, turning his eyes to left, looking at that man. That's a fear expression that he's showing. And then the girl here, this is an interesting little combo, because it looks like her upper lip is being pulled up, is what we see in the emotion of disgust, is what she's showing on her face. And you see your teeth, you see the line that runs off your nose is called a nasolabial furrow. And when people feel disgust, that gets picked up like that. And it sometimes wrinkles your nose a little bit. It's hard to see a little bit of wrinkle, but it almost looks like her brows are down a little bit, which sometimes happens when you wrinkle your nose a tiny bit. The brows come down and the upper lip comes up. So there's a variety of emotions just going on right in that, just simply in that particular.
That's fascinating to hear. So the girl discussed, the gentleman in the background was what?
He's showing fear right there.
Fear. And then the center guy you said was pain.
It's like pain.
Wow.
Right? You see that when the brows come down, and then you also get the orbicularis oculi. Usually you get with pain too, a little bit of the same thing with that upper lip being pulled up. And it's a little hard to see that because his mouth is open. So it's hard to know. And usually when that lip comes up, it starts to expose the teeth. So you see a little bit of the teeth being exposed. So again, a little bit hard to tell, but certainly that upper configuration is what we would see in pain.
So out of curiosity, Out of curiosity, the girl that's showing disgust, like, it doesn't seem like a situation where she would show disgust to him for this. I mean, he's being squished. Why would she show that kind of emotion?
Yeah, that's the one thing about emotions that make them interesting, right? Emotions, the expressions of it tell you what people are feeling, but they don't tell you why they're feeling it. And so there could be a variety of factors on that. You know, maybe because of all this and thing, maybe he just smells really bad and he's now projecting with his voice and everything the smell, because, you know, they've been trapped, don't have water, food, any of the other kind of stuff for a long period of time. Maybe just simply the sound that he's making, or maybe there's this, or some little squish or some other little thing that happens. Just simply that could be enough to trigger disgust. You know, you hear certain squishy sounds or other sorts of things, and we sometimes react to them as a function of that. And that might be what she is reacting to as well.
So Jeff,
this things we don't know about. So.
This is one of those photos that we were kind of talking about, close up, just face or context, right? So
yeah,
close up face, yes, you get that emotion, and I can tell you about it in the caption, but I believe the within the context of the whole image and exactly what the doctor was describing, it becomes more storytelling and more impactful.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on here, a lot of people, and there's a lot of faces you can't see, of course. So I'm curious, like, what is that? How does that change perspective and the fact that there's a lot of people with their back to the camera and like, is that just
like random places too? That's the other thing. So you see a whole bunch of hands, and it's hard to figure out exactly whose hands those are that keep popping up in all of this, and that just sort of adds to the confusion of it all. You see hands there, you see those hands, and I don't think they're from that guy. They're somebody else's hands. So
yeah, there's actually a couple of faces. Then there's faces down here that aren't necessarily exposed, but this looks more
pale face. So there's the guy in the white shirt. It's hard to make out his expression, but immediately to his left, just at the frame there, that's another fear expression. Right there, right where you have it. Yes. That's another fear expression in the crowd.
That was scary.
Makes it for a scary moment. So one of the cool things about emotion is that without knowing that that's a fear expression, and obviously you've said that now, so we know that that's going on. Emotion, like you said, is that universal language, right? That we all speak. We don't necessarily know it. We can't necessarily pinpoint it or say exactly what it is, but by looking at these people and their emotions of fear, I should also understand that they are fearful, correct? So that's an interesting thing to pull from this photograph, because there's so many people around this photograph that are showing fear, and then you've got these two in the middle that are pain and then disgust. So it's like they're surrounded by fear, and as you said, JT, it was a very scary situation with a lot of stuff going on. So that all makes sense. But it's just interesting to have those highlighted in the middle like that.
Yeah, Jeff, it's not just the signaling system, but there's a receiving system in us too. So there are specific areas of the brain that respond to specific facial expressions, right? So there's a part of the brain that responds to fear. This is in the amygdala area. There's a part that responds to anger and so on. So this is where some of the argument about the hardwiring of us human beings is the fact that if you have specific brain areas, there's a specific brain area that responds to recognizing faces. And if you have a stroke or some other damage, there are people, it's called prosopagnosia. They can't recognize faces. You show them a picture of their own selves, they don't know who it is, right? So, we're wired to process these things too. And that's why at sort of a subconscious level, if I show you a bunch of shots of people showing fear, it's activating the amygdala, which is the same section of your brain that causes you to feel the emotion of fear, right? So there's this connect. Now, some have argued evolutionarily, because we're social animals, this is important. If you start seeing a lot of fear, if your body starts to react, right, what does fear do? Fear rearranges your body's priorities. heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up. People go, well, with light complexion, you can see it. You go white with fear, but it happens to everyone, whatever your complexion is. But that blood is leaving the periphery and is going to the large muscles of your legs, because your body is basically saying, we have no time for anything but escape right now. That's why your mouth goes dry in fear, because the body says, digestion, don't eat it, right? And everything's got to go in the service of getting you out of Dodge now, right? And so that's why this is all sort of interconnected. So if you're in a group situation and all of a sudden you start seeing a lot of fear with other people, you start to feel that way, but that's kind of giving you a head start. And if it's a predator, you know, a lion that's run in or somebody with a gun, your body's already got you prepared to try to get out of that danger area through the social signaling of others.
So Jeff, I mean, this is what's so fascinating, and I appreciate being, you know, a part of this is, look, are we discussing this? Are we getting exactly what you're talking about, how we feel when we look at something and how they feel? Are we getting that from a picture of an F-15? Are we getting that from a picture of a ship? Right?
Yeah.
So again, that's why it's so important. And I go back to the Haiti story where they called me up and go, look, we're tired of seeing the people. I'm like going, no, you're wrong. You have to see the people in order to put them into context. I showed that photo right there. And then what's being done? Oh, here comes the big bad military, big, beautiful planes coming in, cargo loading off. Ah, I get it now. Instead of the plane that we've seen 100 times from all other bases that all look the same, unloading supplies. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We need both. I'm not saying we don't need one or the other, but we do need both. Why should I care?
So how does that play? We talked a little bit about video portraits previously, but like as far as video portraits or creating a video production itself, how does capturing faces and stuff like that play into that role? Now that we have action or things being played out in a scene, are faces as important?
Yeah, because then you get to see the dynamics of it all, right? So then you get to see the full expression. Because you know, one of the things that Jeremy's trying to do is to capture the specific moment, hopefully the apex of that moment. Video gives us the onset, the apex, and the offset, all as far as the flow. And the flow of an expression also affects our interpretation and impression of particular emotions as well. So that adds a subtler, but yet still another layer of interpretation in terms of the, for example, genuineness or non-genuineness of the particular emotion. So it does certainly add to it.
With video portraits, are you talking about the standard kind of like, here's my guy staring at the camera?
Correct.
So to me, those again, I would love to be proven wrong or shown wrong. They're forced, right? So again, capturing somebody in a studio is forced. Having that ability to make them at ease or feel that it's not forced, but it's hard to, again, we're 1/5,000th of a second where video has to roll for a little bit. So it is forced. I mean, I love them. It's beautiful, but if you could capture that stuff, those faces and hold on those portrait faces while you're shooting, I think would be stronger while they're doing the action.
I think there might be something to be said about within a video portrait, you could show someone's emotion change over a short period of time.
There's a plus to it.
Yeah. So that's something that could come about. Is there any other photos here, JT, specifically that you want to go over, or Mark?
I wouldn't mind going over the headhunters. You're right by it. More specifically, the next one. So this is like my first time out in the field, knowing that I'm going to capture portraits. And this is in India, in Nagaland. These guys are headhunters. If they're tattooed on the face, it means they've taken a head. They were hard. And there's another portrait called the Aputani women. And they're kind of tattooed on the face. I think there might be one or two in there. they were lovely to work with. Again, had to have an interpreter, knew very, very little communication skills back and forth, didn't tell them to pose in any certain way. And this is what I got. I had, again, a better time with the women. They were just, more welcoming than the men. So that's kind of, and I don't know what they're thinking. I know why I like it. For this one, it's about the facial expression, but the body language on this one for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the little details that are all around.
Yeah, exactly. He's got a little bottle of hooch to get him through, looks like, behind him there. And, but again, you've got the same thing about not taking up space. He's staying within the contours of the body and really sort of collapsed in himself. And then you see within the face, the inner corners of the eyebrows pulled up, right? This is your forehead muscles called frontalis. The medial means the middle part. And the inner corners of his eyebrows seem to come up. We see that in sadness or distress, right? And that's one of the hardest muscles to fake, like our smile muscle, the zygomatic major. We can smile all the time unless you have some sort of neurological deficit of some sort. And it's very easy to control that particular muscle. But this one, the inner corners of the eyebrows, most people cannot move those on purpose, okay? It turns out there was a study done 30 years ago showing that only 5 out of 200 people could just raise the inner corners. The whole eyebrow we can all do unless you've been Botoxed, right? But just the inner corners is really hard to do on purpose. But when people are feeling an emotion as genuine, it happens. And so when you see that, you realize that's a very hard muscle to fake. And so there's a sort of a genuineness to that, a little bit of almost sadness that you see within that particular individual. And sadness is a withdrawal motion as well. Sadness, you sort of come in. So the body is sort of amplifying a little bit of the sadness that comes with it. At least that's how that would be interpreted if we were scoring up the facial expression that comes with that.
Oh my God, I feel bad, like I stressed this guy out or something.
Yeah, well, if you wind it out, maybe it's just he's sad that his way of life is vanishing. I mean, that could be another thing too. And maybe that just you reminded him of that.
What's the other one say? The one that was right next to it.
Yeah, he's taking up more space. So you think he might be a little higher in the tribal, group societal ranking.
He was a chief.
Okay, well, there you go. So he sits like a chief. So he takes up more space. I don't see much as far as his expression goes, just looking off, but his body shows a little bit more dominance, right, in terms of what he's doing with his, with the rest of it.
Yeah.
Do you guys have anybody who has questions or comments, concerns?
Someone said this is a super dope portrait. There hasn't been very many comments or questions, but I mean, I feel like I would be hard pressed to come up with a question that goes along with this subject as well. So I guess I'm not super surprised, but
let's go. I mean, if we still have time, let's go.
Sure.
I'm curious. It's about 6 or 7 over to the right. There's a great story behind that. One more. The lady in the green.
This is like an emotional quiz.
Yeah, this is and I'll tell you the story after, but I just want to kind of hear about this.
Yeah, that's interesting because the lady on the right showing more emotion, right?
Right.
Showing a little bit of the distress that in her face. The woman on the left in the green shirt her eyes are asymmetrical, first off. So we call it sort of wall-eyed. That's not necessarily an emotion per se or anything. And the arms folded. I mean, people talk a lot. There's surprisingly not a lot of science on, people at parties will tell you, oh, this means you're being defensive, right? But there's as far as you go in the scientific literature, there really isn't much about it. Sometimes you're just cold, sometimes it's just more comfortable. There could be some other things, but again, it tends to be sort of a withdrawn and within sort of a thing. It looks maybe like her left eyebrow is up a little bit too. And it could be just part of the asymmetry of the face.
You know what? It's fascinating. So this is shot over in Iraq. She is deaf.
Mm.
So she is deaf, and you're exactly right with withdrawn. She was the older daughter. A few days later, we followed her she got hearing for the first time. Again, it's on my blog. You can go look up. It's called Cinderella Story, where she was really the oldest daughter, but had to do all the chores, couldn't hear, was kind of thrown to the side because she's too old, we can't help her. And the organization I worked with came in and did this. And then the final picture in the story is her dancing, like literally turned from into Cinderella, dancing at a wedding, hearing the music for the first time, big smile and everything. So fascinating. You hit it. You couldn't read her a whole lot, right? But then there was that withdrawn kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So one person asked, Lucas Morrow asks, any advice to us introverts? How do you get through your own barrier of discomfort when getting that close and personal, especially with private moments? Now, JT, if there's anybody to ask this question to, I'm pretty sure it's you. It's based on everything that I've ever seen. You have no problem getting in someone's face.
I did at first, and
that's great to know, because you obviously got over that. So.
Yes, and it's and when I do lectures, and if you've been to the DoD workshops, I talk about holding a camera. We walk around as humans, and we have our barrier space, right? And I always say, most photographers walk around with a 10-foot pole on the end of their camera. I will not get any closer. I will not get any further away. I won't get up. I won't get down. It's just, that's my 10-foot barrier. But it's amazing when you go in and you take your first shot, you fill that frame, control the background, and wait for the moment, and you're right in somebody's face, and filling that frame with that emotion. Once you see the importance of that, or do it for the first time, you're like, man, why wasn't I doing this all along? And you know what? The beauty too is I don't need to hold the camera here nowadays. I can hold it, here, and to get closer. But I think once you physically realize that, wow, it tells a story, it's a tool like anything else, getting in close. It's a tool to get there. And these moments are important. At the end of the day, I don't know these guys, I just met them, but it's how do you carry yourself, right? Sometimes they're longer lenses. I think this is a longer lens. But it's how do you carry yourself? How do you walk into a room? I want to walk into a room where I'm accepted and, feel warm. I don't feel like a threat. This is an example where knew nothing. My wife and I walked by, all the tourists were on the outside, and they invited us in, sitting down, smoking and joking and not knowing a lick of English, and we ate with them. And it was just an amazing and incredible experience. And I think it's I know it sucks if you're introverted, but really work on it. And I guarantee you it'll help. Once you can make these images that speak and tell, it'll change your world. It really will.
So what is it that triggers that? What was your changing point? Did you practice with people you knew or family members where you kind of got in their personal space and practiced that? Or did it take all the way for you to feel that emotion in a photographer and finally have that aha moment for you to realize I should do this more often?
I think it comes down to an ethical dilemma that you were put in. So if I had to look back, there is a pivotal moment in everybody's kind of career life that changes something, right? And I was working with my sister. She's a Columbus, Ohio neonatal intensive care nurse. And, you know, I was photographing her doing her story in a family that was up there. And I was having I was that person that didn't want to get too close. I mean, there's kids that are surviving, but there's also babies that are dying there. And I came home to my editor and just said, you know, this happened, but I couldn't get close. I just felt ethically it was wrong. And he explained it to me this way. He goes, Jeremy, he goes, don't you think that those parents would have loved to have the very last photos of their child alive? And that kind of put on a light bulb switch. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to document the things we do. You know, war. I don't want to be sitting there photographing somebody's dying. My grandmother in the 21 series, it's literally her last breath. One of the hardest photographs I've ever had to take. I mean, tears just streaming down. But I look at that photo and see how angelic she looks to the kid's last breath of, you know, their last family photo. There's going to be hard times, and it is. But what I think in my head is that it's important. If I miss that moment for these people, is there going to be a change? Am I doing that person like my grandmother's legacy? When I look at that, I see the angelic, I see the woman that she was. You know, I'm just spouting that kind of stuff off because that's kind of how I feel and I am. I'm not saying that it's the right way, it's the wrong way, but it's kind of how I process it through. I've learned to be that people person, and you throw me into a situation, war or scroll to the very beginning, and I'll just kind of as an example. I mean, war is death and destruction. I mean, and we as photographers are always out there. There you go. War is death and destruction, and I mean, we're always out there capturing this. But damn, there is some beauty in this world. There's amazing beauty going on. And it's, again, this couple, you know, I went by this image. It was never one of my first images I put out. I don't even know if JCCC, I even filed it or whatever it's called now, DIMOC. But I came back and I look at this and I go, wow, yes, within all this death and destruction, there is beauty. There's life still goes on. So I guess that's kind of, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's kind of my process through it.
It's great to think about.
Or confuse you.
Yeah, or confuse you. I mean, it kind of goes back to that narrative that we talked about, where if, you know, as military photographers or videographers, we capture war and firefights and people loading up tanks and loading their weapons and everything like that. Of course, there's going to be a bad connotation that goes along with the concept of living or being in a Middle Eastern country that may be war torn. But this is that perspective that that doesn't often get shown, in that kind of gives a full view of both sides of the coin to kind of show that there is positive parts to being there. And there is, you know, obviously there's a reason why we are there, and there's plenty to save, so, or plenty to help with, or plenty to be a part of. So.
Jeff, can I say this one piece of advice that was given to me, and I wish I remember who it was by, but I was at a combat camera conference years ago. Just all these old timers that were just amazing, and it's always stuck with me. He said, to truly show war, to really think about it, to really truly show war, it's on the soldier's face next to you. And he goes, because you're in a firefight. Most firefights, you know, the enemy is down the way. You're getting little puffs of smoke here or there. It's not hand-to-hand combat, most likely, you know. The closest you're going to get is close quarters combat. Again, to truly show war is to show it in the person's face next to you. So again, think about what he said on the war stuff. Now bring it back to the flight line. To truly show the flight line is on the person's face next to you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It all wraps them together. Mm-hmm. Does anybody have any other questions that are online? Is there any other photos that you want to touch on?
I'm at your disposal.
Okay. Well, I think we hit all the ones that we really wanted to really kind of get some insight on. And I think we kind of went over all the questions or all the things that I wanted to talk about. And Dr. Frank, you really brought an interesting perspective to this conversation to kind of help understand the science behind the way that we feel, and maybe differentiate like who, as a photographer, like what makes a good photographer, and are they able to take the pictures that match the emotion of the situation versus taking one that doesn't match. But again, there's a beauty in a mismatched situation as well.
Yeah, the juxtaposition of things, a face and a body that's always fascinating when you see that. And, we're often conflicted as human beings. I want to eat ice cream all day, but I don't. And I got to resist those temptations. And I want to express, but I don't. And I do this. So we're always in this little war with ourselves, in a subtler way, so often. So, and I think when you get folks like Jeremy who can sort of bring that out, capture that at the level of nuance, to me is always fascinating. So I love to learn from folks like him as well. So this has been quite an interesting exercise.
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you both for being here. It's been a great conversation for me. These often, if nothing else, I feel like I get to learn a lot from these particular, these shows that we put on. And I feel like we took a lot away from this, and hopefully some people at home or wherever they are, they took a lot away from this as well. If you have any questions for Dr. Frank or JT, you can leave them in the comments if you're watching this not in the live situation, and we can make sure that those get to those individuals so they can answer them and kind of give their perspective on that. That being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here real quick. But again, thank you. Do y'all have any last comments or anything like that when it comes to emotion photography and being part of this thing we call life? What roles that plays in it? What role do we play in it?
Yeah, well, I'll just say, art is just science we haven't figured out yet, as I said earlier, in our little presentation, and this sort of re-emphasizes it for me. But this is the thing that also projects the science, capturing reality, right? In the lab, it's controlled, and Jeremy talks about that. Well, okay, you do a portrait, you bring someone in, it's a managed thing. But life is life. And that's ultimately what we're trying to understand human beings, where they live, which is out there. And the ability to capture it, bring it back to enable us to look at it and study it, I think is an extraordinarily valuable tool just for simply understanding our species. So, photographers are invaluable for that.
You're only as great as your last photograph. I mean, Pulitzer Prize winning photographers aren't out shooting Pulitzer Prize winning photographs every day. It's practice, it's skill. It's, I don't carry my camera with me every day. I miss things, and I get mad that I miss things, but I also like to enjoy life too. And when I don't have the camera, I'm still watching people's body languages, watching their expressions. At the end of the day, it's about the moment, the moment, the moment.
Those are some great words from two great people. I can't say much more on the subject other than what you guys have already said. You really nailed it all. And you're the experts on this stuff. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for sitting and talking with me and talking to some other people that are around the area, around the United States or the world. And I guess that's all we got for this particular episode. So that being said, for those of you that are still here, be it known that the PA review is here at the disposal of anybody that wants to use it, that wants to put on a particular show where they can bring up a subject, talk about a subject in front of people, get some guests on here, and just help us all learn together. So coming up in July 17th, our next episode is going to be specifically on public affairs, the public affairs flying mission. We're going to have Senior Master Sergeant Jeremy Zier and Senior Master Sergeant Josh DeMotz, and we're going to talk about all things flying, what goes into it. And this would be a great opportunity for those that want to get into the flying status, want to be a part of, be a flying photographer or videographer. it's a great opportunity for you to kind of know what goes into running a program at your local office. We're also going to have a couple people that are 9 Charlies that have successful programs that can kind of give some insight on how to make that happen. So tune in that time, and until then, thanks for being here, and we'll see you then.